bounty hunting is a complicated profession. Don't you agree?
The Cynic Radio Podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cynic Radio Podcast. Here are your hosts, Cynic.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Agree?
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
This is the greatest show of all time.
You found us. This is episode 177 of the Cynic Radio Podcast, and I'm your 100% of a dick co-host, Cynic. And joining me, as always, two graduates from the Nova Academy, Igri and Ryan. And on this week's show, we're getting ready for the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, so we're stepping into the CRP time machine to a simpler time, before any of us knew what a Fauci was, and Trump was somewhat of a harmless reality star. But more importantly, this show was still 3 years away from being a reality. This is 2014, and the MCU couldn't be hotter. The Phase 1 just took over the planet. This week we get the opportunity to discuss the original from James Gunn, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. Ryan, it's been about 9 years since this movie was introduced. We've met Rocket, we met Groot, we met Star-Lord. But has this film stand the test of time?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think it was, without getting too much into like my final thoughts, it was a fresh take, and I think it was something that showed us that Marvel had a formula that worked. And if you have the right actors, the right writer, that they can make any character work. And I think that was the springboard for us to realize that, hey, Marvel's got this wealth of IP and characters, and it doesn't need to be their A or B level characters. We can go all the way down the well. And again, if it's well written, it'll be good, and people will flock to the theaters.
Yeah, I'm sitting down to write questions this morning. I went back and rewatched it again, which it has to be about the 100th time I've watched it. And it absolutely has stood the test of time. Like, it feels fresh. It feels new. The jokes are still funny and relevant, and the actors are still around. So, 9 years has done this movie wonders. IG, Phase 1 saw Marvel play it safe and stick to the big name characters. But as we started Phase 2, we started to hear about this group called the Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man. Were you worried that non-comic book related fans might know who these characters are, or even be disinterested?
I was really kind of worried about that like maybe people wouldn't go see it just because like Guardians of the what? Who are these people? What's a Groot? Star-Lord? What? I've never even heard of that, because it's like a C or even D tier comic book character, right? But The trailers were okay, and I kind of went and saw it on a flyer myself. Even though it was a Marvel movie, I just decided, it was August, right, 2014. I really had nothing else going on. It was hot as balls outside. So I decided I'm going to go sit in a nice air-conditioned movie theater for a couple hours and see what this is about. And man, am I glad I did, because not knowing, I knew who Star-Lord was. I knew about Rocket Raccoon. I didn't know anything about Gamora. I had seen Groot in something that I had read previously, but he didn't really stick in my memory. And, I heard rumblings of Thanos, but Ronan the Destroyer, or the Accuser, I hadn't heard anything about him. I'm glad I took a flyer on it, because, man, how was I so surprised by this movie?
It really did come out of nowhere, and it was a huge gamble for Marvel starting off Phase 2 to kind of move away from Thor and Captain America and go to a group that basically nobody has heard of outside of comic book fans. But speaking of gambles, Ryan, James Gunn, who is definitely a man of his own, rolled the dice and cast his two biggest named actors as a smack-talking CGI raccoon and a tree that only says one word. Now, the movie was a massive hit, luckily for him, but if it wasn't, do you think Marvel brings him back for Volume 2 and 3?
Probably. If it's a failure, I think it it would have had larger implications on our Marvel and the MCU. I think if that's a failure, we don't get a lot, and so I can't imagine we get him back unless it was one of those things that like it was a failure financially initially, and then kind of built some momentum, on streaming, I guess at this point. But yeah, I think it was a big gamble, and obviously they gave it to the right person, and it paid off.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what Guy Ritchie did with Snatch, I'm sorry, with Snatch, where he cast Brad Pitt, but then he had him use like this heavy Irish accent, so nobody knew what he was saying for the length of the film. Yeah. And the movie executives saw it, and they were furious at him, but it worked. I mean, that's another movie that you can go back and watch 100 times and still find something new about it. Outside of Jon Favreau / Tony Stark's complete obsession with AC/DC, Marvel really hasn't leaned, or they didn't lean heavily on a music backdrop. IG, do you think that we have James Gunn for kind of reinventing the movie soundtrack? And what was your favorite song from the first movie?
James Gunn has done kind of the same thing when he goes other places too, right? When he made that Suicide Squad movie, there was a lot of music in that. Anywhere he's been, that's one of his things, is he likes to throw in a lot of older like music for us, right? So 80s and like mostly 70s and 80s music, a little maybe some early 90s. And the thing is a lot of the stuff just kind of makes you feel good listening to it, right? It's usually just it's a bop, for lack of a better word, and he did it so ingeniously, like throughout this movie, and like where the music fit the tone of whatever was going on. And funny enough, like my favorite tune was the time when Star-Lord was singing himself when he was doing Ooh Child, right? That old song by the 5 Starships and everything. And he was singing himself. I think, because it was a song and he was like, throw it to you. All right, taking it back. And it was a song that is very recognizable to so many people, but like you just didn't expect that to happen. And so I guess, Ooh Child was probably my favorite part of the soundtrack.
He really does have a knack for doing that, James Gunn. It almost becomes part of the movie. Music always sets the tone, but it's almost like a invisible character that we don't see. It sets the tone. It lets you know exactly how the characters are feeling. And you're right. He has brought it with Suicide Squad, with Peacemaker. It is his calling card, and I hope it continues when he moves over to DC.
And don't forget that wonderful Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special that you love so much.
Why do you hate me, Ryan? Why do you hate me? I've done so much for you. After flashback scene where we experience the loss of Quill's mother, we find an adult Star-Lord stealing an artifact from a temple, very Indiana Jones-like. We later find out it's an Infinity Stone. But we also meet Breet, who's an alien that he apparently had sex with, forgot her name, and forgot that she was even part of the ship, or on the ship. I mean, looking at these movies, and now after seeing 2 and getting ready for a third, Ryan, we've heard other names bandied about that could have played Star-Lord. But would this movie worked as well as it did if Chris Pratt wasn't playing the lovably, morally gray Star-Lord?
It's hard to imagine. I mean, look, on one hand, I think we could say, we could say that with anybody, anybody that's cast into the role, but it is really hard to, I guess it's more his portrayal of Star-Lord. He does a great job with that character. And I guess Star-Lord's a character. It's not like Batman where we all have a frame of reference and we can say this guy did a good or Joker's even better. You have a frame of reference where you can really say, oh, that was a good Joker. That was a bad Joker. For most of us, we have no frame of reference for Star-Lord. So I just love his version of that character. So yeah, sure. Could another actor have done it? Yeah. But like in that role, what was needed for that character with that group, I think Chris Pratt knocks it out the park, and it'd be hard to beat that for what it is.
And can you really imagine how much weight he lost from doing Parks and Rec to take this job? He wanted the job. So, he's not, and I don't think he's even turned later like, yeah, I'm about done with this doing Star-Lord thing. I think he's still happy to be doing it and happy to be around the property and doing Marvel stuff. And it's probably the last time he's going to get to do it here in Volume 3, because I think they're going to, if they continue doing anything with Guardians, I think they're going to put in a new lineup. It's rumblings. I'm not 100%, but I would assume that that's the way they go, because that's the way the comics go. Like the Guardians are constantly changing, just like the Avengers changed who's in the Avengers lineup constantly. But yeah, Chris Pratt went through a total body transformation to get this role.
Yeah, not only the weight loss, but the muscle cut as well. I mean, he did look like an action hero when they showed him in the prison scene when they were delousing him and spraying him down. It's amazing to see what these guys will do for their art, you know, whether it be him gaining muscle or Christian Bale losing weight, or, you know, they really must change their lives completely just for that 6 or 8 month period to get ready for these roles. But hats off to him for being able to do that, because I've recently lost a little bit of weight, and I'll tell you, it was a struggle. It's you constantly have to be on guard with it. So I can't imagine, you know, dropping 80 pounds plus getting cut on top of that. We get a coming together in the square as Quill, Rocket, Gamora, and Groot all fight it out a bit. They end up being arrested by the Nova Corps, and we are given a bit of exposition by John C. Reilly's character. Not only was it prominently displayed in the trailers, but it's one of the biggest scenes in the movie where we get introduced to them and the way Nova feels about him. I mean, IG, do you feel like it might have set the tone for the rest of the movie? Because we got to know them really well due to that lineup scene.
Yeah, it was quick. It was easy. It was just a way to explain like who they are, where they come from, why it's okay that they're being arrested and being sent to their prison colony. It was just a real neat like way to lock it in without having to go into everybody's backstory and show all kinds of scenes and take half an hour to try and get everything to work out. They just, hey, here's 3 minutes. This is Groot. He's a tree. And here's Rocket. And he's an experiment. And here's Gamora. And it just, here's their story. We're just going to drive by now. And I think it was genius to do that because, again, nobody knew who the characters were for the most part. And it's a real fast, easy way to put them into the movie and let everybody know who they are, why they're there.
After meeting Drax and also having conflict with him, the Guardians masterfully work together to escape from prison, displaying 5 different distinct, not only skill sets, but personalities, Ryan. If you had to be one of the Guardians, which one would you choose?
It's a good question. Probably Groot, because he's the strongest of them. I would like to be able to grow my limbs for whatever functions necessary, and just doesn't have to say much. So maybe Groot.
And the tallest.
I think he says way more than says way more than you think he does. Like
I guess,
as apparently his "I am Groot" says a lot to Rocket.
Yeah, that's fair. Fair point.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like Wookiee because it's mostly tonal. Are they reading into it, or can they actually? Is there a way to actually speak Groot? Yeah. I don't quite understand that. How about you, IG? Pick a Guardian.
Maybe Drax, because like you just get to be the lovable idiot, but you're still strong, and you like it. You get to be so literal about everything. You get to hide in plain sight. Why is that not great? Drax is fun. I love Drax.
Yeah, Drax is great, and he gets to turn invisible, which is amazing. Ryan, Ronan as a villain. We get to see some of his abilities and his strength. In one-on-one combat, he bests Drax easily. But is the presence of Thanos as an even bigger bad in the background, does it undermine him as a villain in the film?
Not really. I think not really. I think what undermines him more is just that he's not an interesting character. I think there's no, he's just kind of like, I'm a bad guy who wants stuff. Like there's no real, there's no character. There's really not much development in his character. There's no reason to, even giving us some reason to feel some kind of sympathy for him, or at least, feel like we understand his journey. I think that's where Marvel has been hit and miss with that, where we get some great villains, like Killmonger, and then we get some that are just they're just there because we need a villain in the story. So I don't think that it's necessarily that he's undermined by having a bigger bad. It's just that he's just not an interesting character, and I don't really care about his journey or his character one way or another. I don't, and even though he's a huge threat physically, because there's nothing to tie me to him as a character, we all know he's going to lose in the end. So I think that, Thanos being there didn't help, but he was just not a great character to begin with.
Well, and they really didn't flesh out the conflict between the Kree and the Zandalarians. They just didn't. They mentioned it, but we didn't do anything else with it. So, and that seemed like it was the basis of what his character was about.
Yeah.
One of the fun subplots in the movie, IG, was Yondu and the Ravengers chasing Peter for double-crossing him and then trusting him and then him double-crossing them again. They even capture Quill and Gamora at one point, but did they feel like actual threats to the Guardians at all?
I don't know that they felt like threats as much as just additional story. And I don't know that they were supposed to feel like threats. And in all of these movies, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get him anymore because Yondu died.
Hey, spoiler alert.
In Guardians 2.
We're covering Guardians 1, buddy. Now you're
I know, but
at least one pissed off person at you.
A 9-year-old movie that's like, hey, spoiler warning. But we aren't going to get Yondu in 3 because he died in 2. But Yondu's one of my favorite characters in both of the movies, and he's just really well done. Like I enjoyed it so much. So I don't know that they were supposed to be a threat as much as something that is supposed to lead to more story beats later, which it ends up doing, but the Ravagers are a part. They're the people that took Peter from Terra or Earth or whatever you want to call it in the galaxy. So like he has an interest in them and they have an interest in him. And I don't know that threat is the right term for what they're supposed to be. Now they're maybe threatening.
Well, they were chasing him and putting bounties on his life. So,
well, but I think they kind of wanted him back, alive, quote unquote. So it's one of those things like, yeah, there's a bounty, but like he didn't really want to kill him.
Ryan, much like the post-arrest lineup scene, we get a roadmap to where the movies are all headed. The Collector introduces us to the concept of the Infinity Stones. So, after a movie full of arguing and sacrificing themselves for each other, do you think that the bond that ties the Guardians is more one of sadness and loss? The fact that they really started out with nobody and they kind of ended up together almost like a bunch of lovable losers?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think if you look at everyone's backstory, and this gets explored more in other movies as well, but outside of Groot, they're all pretty tragic, and I don't know that we get a lot of Groot's backstory unless I'm forgetting something. But otherwise, everybody's backstory is pretty tragic. Star-Lord witnessing his mother's death and being adopted or kidnapped or whatever it is, and Gamora with being Thanos' daughter, and the sibling rivalry, and you've got Rocket with all that he's been through, and Drax losing his parents. So there is like this bond through tragedy that they all have. That is a great point, and I think that's part of what connects them and makes us feel for them. I think we realize that they're all not good. They're not good people. Like you're framed a different way. They're all villains in one way or another, but they bond through the shared tragedy and eventually become good guys.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that whole coming together because they were at such odds in the beginning, and it didn't really take long for them to grow on each other, which I liked. And there's a general sense of, yes, we get on each other's nerves, but we still love each other. Not that I have any relationships in my life like that. IG, like I mentioned, the final battle between the Kree and the Zandalarians probably wasn't fleshed out very well, but in the third act, we get an epic space and land battle with the Kree, the Zandalarians, the Ravagers, and the Guardians. Was it a proper cap for the third act, despite them not really kind of fully showing us what this conflict was about?
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting enough, and I could poke holes in it all day, but it's happening in space and something that, like, as far as we know in this universe, isn't possible to begin with. So like whatever logic things are kind of out the window, and having basically won and getting to the ground, Ronan just stands there and gets distracted by Peter singing his song and doing a dance off. It's hilarious how it works, but it's amazing that it does, because it kind of shows that Peter's not just some guy. Like Star-Lord might be a little bit more accurate of a name for him because he's something extra. He's not just human. So while I say that there's issues, like, you have this big ship that can obviously just kind of slowly push through the Nova Corps' ship blockade, and the other ships flying around doing a little bit of damage to the Kree's vessel. He gets to the ground and he takes the L anyway. So it was fun, and the biggest thing this movie had going for it throughout the whole runtime was that it's fun. So they didn't get away from that in that final battle. They stuck to, there's some things that if you look real deep, it's going to be a little bit logic problematic, but let's keep it fun and people will stay engaged. And that's exactly what happened. As I stayed engaged, it's fun.
Well, did you think that was the end of Groot when he sacrificed himself for the group?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was like, if there's an emotional beat that's going to give you feels in this movie, that's it, right? That's the thing that's going to be like, and it's funny because like he just repeated the same 3 words through the whole movie. I am Groot. I am Groot. I am Groot. But he sacrificed himself to keep everybody safe when things were exploding, and then said the one time different, we are Groot. And it just like, tear rolled down your face because, you're trying to be tough, but you don't want anyone to see. But it worked. Like, sometimes they can do things in these movies that really kind of get to your feelings, and they've got that formula worked out similar to like Pixar. Like I cry at most of those movies.
Yeah, it is crazy how you can take a CGI tree that's obviously CGI that only says 3 words, but then by the end of the movie, elicit an emotional response from you from it sacrificing itself to save its friends. It was a brilliant play on James Gunn's part. Ryan, the Xandarians reward the Guardians with a clean criminal record, rebuild Star-Lord's ship. What was your favorite moment from the movie, your MVP, and your rating?
Let's see. Okay, I'll go MVP first, and you've got to give that to Chris Pratt. I think the movie might not work without him. But, he is such an important part of the movie, especially the way it is. I think that and the way that it was kind of written by James Gunn. Favorite moments, probably the prison scene. I thought it was just so creative and clever how they worked their way out. It looked really good when they did the anti-gravity came into play. That also looked really good. So I like that scene. I thought that worked really well, but there's a lot to like in this film. It was a big turning point for Marvel in the MCU because it was a big shot that they were taking and they knocked it out the park. It's funny, it's well written, it has an awesome soundtrack, there's some great Easter eggs throughout. You've just got a fantastic cast that's very dynamic. Everyone's doing something different and acting differently. And like you mentioned, you've got the 2 biggest names playing CGI characters, one of which only says 3 words. So they're taking a huge chance with this. But it's a movie that has a lot of heart. There's nostalgia bombs throughout, which is great, being kind of a kid of the 80s. The only negative, as we talked about, is the villain, is a little uninspiring, for a lot of reasons, but I'll take that. It was such a great movie and there was so much other things that worked for it, and it sets up so much great stuff moving forward that it still holds up, and I give it a 9.
IG?
I guess my MVP is probably Rocket, because I think he was the driving force behind a lot of the humor in the stuff. Bradley Cooper in his delivery with all of the lines that Rocket was doing, it was propelling a lot of the things in the story. A lot of exciting things to do. My favorite moment probably is right at the opening credits and stuff like that when they're playing, Come and Get Your Love by Redbone, and Peter's kind of like making his way toward the first Infinity Stone and like kicking little, like they look like womp rats from Star Wars, right? And singing into them and doing everything else. And it kind of did one of those things that, you were really excited about, like what is going on here? Because it was something different from any of the other Marvel movies that we had seen to that point. So it was just one of those things where like I was really excited and confused because that's not how we'd seen any other Marvel movie begin. And we didn't know who any of these characters were to begin with. a lot of fun things happen in this movie, and I was just blown away when I saw it the first time. And it's like you guys said earlier, it stands up. It's still a good movie, and I'm excited for Volume 3. I was excited to see the little stick Groot dancing around in the end credit scenes when we were at the end of the movie. So like there was some form of Groot going to continue. And so, I mean, yeah, it kind of wiped away the damage from watching Groot get killed, but something seemed really cute and fun. And they used to make little like potted plant looking things that would dance to music and stuff that you could buy that I thought about buying, but never did. I'm glad I didn't, but they were cute. A lot of good things about this movie. Ryan's right. Pretty uninteresting villain, but I don't think this movie was about setting up Ronan. This was about setting up Infinity Stones and showing that we're moving toward a bigger thing. So it's okay that he's an uninteresting villain because all the heroes in this movie were so interesting that it was just a good movie to begin with. So I'm right there with Ryan. I give it a 9, and I'm really excited to go see Guardians 3 this weekend.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I remember leaving the theater in utter shock. I mean, I'm a huge Chris Pratt fan, despite the bullshit he gets online for just being himself, which I think is completely unfair. But I love this movie. Outside of the Captain America movies and the Infinity War saga, the 2 last Avengers movies, this movie is my favorite Marvel movie, hands down. It's got such a great sense of humor. I mean, my MVP of the movie, like IG's, was Rocket. He's everything that's right and works about this movie. He's absolutely the best CGI protagonist in any film I've ever seen. My favorite scene was probably the 12% of a plan scene, because as individuals, this just ragged group of individuals, they become a team in the face of overwhelming odds just due to cool speech, and it inspires them. And he's right. Life, a lot of the time, takes a lot more than it gives, but the Guardians gave a lot more than the $14 back then that it took to see the film. I give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 9.5, and I can't wait to see how they wrap up the story, which has been 3 of the most interesting, funny, and compassionate films that Marvel's turned out, and the numerous amount of films that they've done over the last 20 years.
And 1 Christmas special.
Fuck you, Ryan.
It was such a good Christmas special. It was so much fun.
Well, kids, that about wraps up episode 177 of the Cynic Radio Podcast. I'd like to thank my co-hosts, except Ryan, and the listeners, especially in Europe and Asia, which we've been growing over there. And I'm overwhelmed by your support. You can find the show at any of the social medias at Cynic Radio. And questions, comments, concerns, we can be reached at cynicradio@gmail.com. We will be back next week with our review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And until next time, IG,
don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at cynicradio.com. Available for download on iTunes.